Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Freedom Forum, and I'd like to welcome our guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Good to be with you again, Arnie.
No worries, pleased to have you, Robert. And Wallace Klinck from the western side of
Nice to be
Canada.
with you, Arnie, and I'm happy to hear that you've had a recent successful tour. And as you can see, Bob probably looks a little more heated than I do. I think it's about 22 or 3, I think, out here. And what did you say it was, Bob?
It was 46 here yesterday with the humidity.
Eastern
It's
Canada.
a little bit more than my constitution was meant to sustain, I think.
Yeah. Now that's pretty meaty. Okay, well, the things that I saw, just quickly travelling around, was that central western New South Wales is in drought, and there are rivers that are empty, there are water supplies that have run out, and of course the stock, I managed to actually travel, I'd call them through goat tracks, through the mountains, and so I went into the backwaters, if you like, of some of these farms, and the stock are in terrible shape.
Oh,
They're in
really?
terrible shape.
Oh.
So it's whereas you move further north or further east, the rain is there. The crops are set and they're going, but central New South Wales, central western New South Wales, is in a terrible state. Um, so yes, it is. I guess climate change is all over the place, and it's so variable. When you go north or you go south, south has got the cold, whereas north, I was up around 24 degrees, sunny day, almost short pants and a t-shirt. Whereas right now I'm holding my hands because it's quite cool in southern parts of Victoria. So yeah, so it's all over the place. Climate is so variable, and you only need to drive for an hour, and of course climate has already changed.
Are you saying that climate, as we see it, is just weather?
It is absolutely. It's weather and conditions. And you talked about humidity, Robert, and of course if you head north, there's all the tropics up there, so you've got vast areas of high humidity. I was up at Brisbane one time, got off at the airport, and I felt the humidity as soon as I got off. And then, of course, Darwin, the same thing. So it's, yeah, the conditions, weather conditions are so variable. It's incredible. And of course, the people, they're living there and they're fine. And they
That's
just
right.
accommodate it. They just adapt to the changed circumstances. Because at times my son was travelling around and he was exposed to it, and it did him no harm to see increased temperatures or increased humidity or cooler temperatures and all that. Okay, now our subject for the day, again, justification for the national dividend. And I think it's really, really important. I heard a comment when I was travelling by a bloke, and it was in regard to the history of the Commonwealth Bank in Australia and how it was secretly, essentially, and discreetly disassembled in 1924 by political powers. And the public never fought to retain it, but I don't believe that the public were acutely aware of how important it was to have an independent bank um, for their nation, for their governments to run, and for major projects to infrastructure to actually be accommodated, not debt free, but almost debt free. And when they came out of the First World War, we were debt free for that war. The exercise of the war, the cost of execution was paid for in the execution of the war, and so those debts were just in the end cancelled. Now, the discussion that I had with this bloke in regard to that was that the national dividend, if it is paid, and it is paid to each adult, at least each adult, um, for their inheritance, as part of their inheritance to the cultural riches that are before us, that we don't have access to because we're so restricted or confiscated by the banks. If that was paid, people would never ever let it go. They would never ever let it go unless there was some sleight of hand or blackmail or something or other, weaponry, whatever, threatened them. But in actual fact, it's a similar to the vote. It's an opportunity to exercise your freedom, a dividend, which is essentially a financial vote. Anyway, I'll open it up to the floor. Those are my thoughts, and it was an important part of the discussions over the tour. Robert Klinck.
Well, I agree with you, Arnie, that if people were receiving a dividend, they would grow rapidly accustomed to it, and they would never let it go. And it would end the political tyranny we have now, because it would be a window into a new civilization. And once people grasp that, or glimpse that, they would want to extend it. So it is a truly revolutionary concept, and one that would transform society fundamentally.
I believe it is something that would actually take our culture forward. Instead of us regressing through the actual deconstruction of our culture, to me it would actually catapult us forward into an age of consideration and leisure, rather than one of tyranny and work and a constant need to work, when in actual fact the robots can do it, the machines can do it, and then there becomes a time of leisure and deep thought. And it's not as if it's unprecedented, because the history of the, if you like, the ruling class had thousands and thousands of slaves, and so leisure is something that the ruling class exercises or receives all the time, but the normal people don't. The average person doesn't. And so there's this disparity that says, well, if a man shall not work, he shall not eat. How dare they say that, when in actual fact the elites and ruling class do bugger all. Use my words, and I use them carefully. They do bugger all to contribute, but they just live on the fat of the land, and they're saying that others are not worthy to receive their cultural inheritance. Wally Klinck.
That's true, Arnie. Of course, mind you, it is the leisured class from which more imaginative things usually emerge. Because if you're nothing more than a cog in a machine, nothing more than a functionary in some specific activity, but it takes up the larger part of your day, you don't really have much time for any constructive or imaginative thought or activity. In fact, you're probably exhausted, and especially today because of the debt load that is upon virtually all normal people, average people. They're just simply, they want to relax. They just don't want to worry when they go home. They engage in some rather passive and unimaginative, non-creative activities, actually. And it doesn't really contribute anything to their real cultural advantage as individuals or development as individuals, and it doesn't give them a capacity to contribute by and large to society as a whole, or to the overall cultural heritage. It's just an unhealthy situation. Too much work makes Jack a dull boy.
That's right.
We have that old expression.
That's right. I remember. Well, actually, I'll bring up the case with Ian McGilchrist, this psychologist who's been mapping the actual thought process, left and right hemispheres, thought process that goes on in the brain, profound, deep understanding. Now, he was fortunate to have continued his education on to PhDs, and then I believe a reader and a fellow of universities, and so he continued on cross disciplines. And what did he do with his leisure? Because that's what it was. He had an opportunity to leisure. He mapped the thought process of our brain. And in doing so, he's opened up an entirely new approach to psychology, an entirely new approach. And there are some who poo-hoo him. But in actual fact, you start taking these things into account, and then you realize that how does indoctrination work? And it's actually to harm the right hemisphere and just let the left hemisphere dominate the thinking of the individual. That's how you get brainwashed. Robert Klinck.
Well, leisure is sort of a precondition of creativity, but in the situation we have now, people are denied access to resources that they should be able to use. And I think it's very demoralizing, particularly to young people who are trying to step into adult life and have some sort of economic security. If they had a dividend, it would release them from the precariousness of their existence and the demoralization that they face because of the frightfulness of the future they face.
Yeah.
It's a heavy burden that is on young people today, and it's rather strange that their situation seems to be deteriorating rather than improving when the opportunities for self-development should be growing as a result of the enhanced productive capacity of our society.
That's right. Yeah, exactly right. That their cultural inheritance is denied them as well, and of course they're obscure. And I say obscure in the sense that you can't even see the future. You can't actually map it and say, well, I can plan to take on a mortgage because employment is so precarious, and
Right.
I can have a family and think about raising them and enjoying them, and it's always economic interest. When in actual fact the economic question has been answered. And I think it's what do you call it? Insidious, if you like, the domination of finance over all things. When finance, in an actual fact, is simply counting. That's what it is counting, because it's not as if you're exchanging gold. You're just exchanging a printed piece of material or a coin, a stamped out coin. There's no intrinsic value. The coins are not worth their face value. They're made out of raw metals, poor quality raw metals that are really of no real value. They're only a representation of a claim to something of real value. So money or credit creation through banking, through the computer blips and all that, is simply counting. And if you have progressive debt, then obviously it's a spurious counting system to advantage someone. And of course that's the in the end the Bank of International Settlements, which ultimately issues new credits to the central banks around the world, and they've got no right to do that. There's no need for it. In fact, the credits can be issued by each nation's central authority, such as a National Dividend Authority or something of that nature. Wally Klinck.
Yes, Arnie, I think I'm going to pass because you stole my chosen term, insidious. And that's exactly what it is. But in any case, I will endeavor to carry on, despite your attempt to sabotage my efforts. But it is insidious. It's extremely insidious because people are struggling for survival, economic survival. They have no need to struggle for economic survival. As you said, they're struggling for financial survival. Finance purports to represent the physical economy, but it doesn't. And that's where the insidious nature of the thing comes in. People assume also that everybody must be working and working hard because we must be in some stage of scarcity because obviously everyone's struggling. And if we were all in a great state of luxurious abundance, we wouldn't have to be doing that. So we're working to service these false debts that have been created. As you said, I believe when something is produced, it is produced, and it takes physical inputs to produce it. And the physical inputs are the real costs of the production. If you were to simply take money away and pretend it didn't exist, you would still have the problem of production and consumption. And when something was produced, you would know that it was paid for because it was there, and it was there for the taking. Yeah. But it doesn't work that way because today, money that is earned in production is prematurely canceled. We're distributing money today and producing things which will, in the future, be coming off the line as produced finished items. And in order for us to acquire those things, we have to have money. And how do we get it? We get it by being paid wages, salaries, and dividends in the process of that production. But if that money is somehow short-circuited, if it is canceled prematurely as purchasing power, then you're left with a deficit when the goods come out with a deficiency. And somehow you have to make that up if you're going to access the goods. And it's only rational that you should access them. You produce them, and you produce them presumably for a real purpose.
Yeah.
So you should be able to access them, but you can't unless you produce something additional. in
in
order
order
to
to
earn
get,
new
yeah.
incomes, new
Hmm.
financial incomes.
Hmm.
And so it's really, as you say, very insidious, because people have this idea, oh my God, can't pay my bills this month. I'm having such a struggle. My neighbor's having a struggle. We're going to have to work harder and harder to produce more. You see,
Mm.
it's all a delusion.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to say, I hate to say so, but I don't hate to say so, but I think it's an obligation to say so, to point out
Mm.
that it is an illusion.
Hmm.
And if you're going to live by illusion,
Hmm.
well, I don't think the prognosis is too good for your success in life.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you, Wally. I think that's actually correctly deconstructed the mirage or the illusion in front of us. You've done that in order to understand it. No, I appreciate that. Robert Klinck.
Yeah, it's interesting that when Major Douglas, the founder of social credit, first propounded his ideas, there was a great deal of interest among what you might call the elite in society. And he was getting together with all sorts of people, even up to the level of royalty,
Hmm.
and getting attention. He was financed by the Southern family to come to Canada to testify before a committee of Parliament. The Southerns
Hmm.
were maybe the richest family in the country,
Hmm.
but it it dawned on these members of the oligarchy or the elite finally that what Douglas was proposing was a revolutionary reform of the financial system that
Hmm.
would result in people becoming free,
Yeah,
independent,
that's
and
right.
able, if they didn't want to participate in what the oligarchs were proposing, to opt out, to say, no, I
Yeah.
don't want to do that. I'm not going to do it. It's against my principles or
Hmm.
whatever. And so they organized campaigns to sabotage social credit.
Hmm.
They did it in Great Britain. Douglas said that the Bankers Association there spent £5 million
Yeah.
in anti-social credit propaganda. I know that in Canada, one of the foremost professors was hired to go across the country ridiculing the social credit movement in Alberta.
Stephen
So,
Leacock.
yeah. Anyway, uh, they want to retain their control over society.
Hmm.
And social credit, I don't even say it would wrest it from them, but it would enable everybody to enjoy a measure of freedom from this system that they haven't enjoyed because they've been denied their cultural heritage.
That's right.
So
Mm.
it's a tremendous change that we're proposing, and people shouldn't underestimate the significance of it or the likely hostility of the powers that be toward it.
Yeah.
It's been felt in the past, and
Yeah.
it's they do not love their fellow man. That's the problem. If you love your fellow man, you don't want them to be in a worse position than you were in, or particularly a better position. You want them to be themselves and to realize their potential and to
Hmm.
contribute to society in whatever way they're made to do it. But
Yeah.
these people want to keep their thumbs on top of everybody,
That's
unfortunately.
right. Yeah. I describe it as essentially someone who wants to put their foot on another person's throat, and in that position they dominate them. The policy of social credit, and it is a policy of freedom, whereas the policy of the existing financial system is a policy of tyranny, imposing debt so that it enslaves people, where it just emasculates their every move because when they come out of university, it's student loans. When they think about a family and a home, it's home loans. Their level of indebtedness, and yet the material abundance is there. The robots, the machines are doing everything. It's ridiculous to consider that they're in a state of it's not squalor, but for the one who does have a job. But the fact is that if you like, the result of is it Chicago, Detroit, with the shutting down of motor vehicle manufacture, and the homelessness. that's there, the destitution of the people, of thousands, of hundreds of thousands of people destitute, and yet the materials are there. They're turning Chicago on and off the systems, turning a car manufacturing on and off, and then it causes thousands of more people to be destitute. It's ridiculous. It is really, and it is a haze. It's an illusion. We believe in illusion as this is real instead of going to the supermarkets and seeing the abundance that's in there, going to the hardware stores and any they can't sell enough of small goods or home furnishings or white goods or whatever it is. You can't sell enough of it, and if you could, they'll manufacture more. That's why it's ridiculous to think that people have to be homeless. They don't have to be anything. They need their inheritance and they're entitled to it. Wally Klinck.
I guess if you want to control your fellow man, you hire a witch doctor to work on their minds.
Yeah.
And that places an illusion in their minds. And it can be so great, actually, as it potentially, it can actually kill. And in fact, that isn't even an extravagance, because the system that we operates automatically to create the conditions for war. It generates war. So in fact, it's a form of witchcraft that is literally responsible for the deaths of millions and suffering of millions of people. And I don't know if we really can even begin to conceive of what changes would take place in the minds of men if they actually had economic security and they didn't have to be obsessed with the daily activities of merely going through some function, sometimes important, but frequently not, in order to acquire money. Can you really imagine a society where an individual were released to that extent? What might happen? Well, some people say everybody would sit down and they wouldn't do anything. But you see, social credit isn't like that. Social credit is accountable. Social credit, the dividend is payable, and the subsidy or the compensation of retail prices those things are dependent upon the excess of production over consumption. So if everybody sits down and refuses to do anything, which I think is ridiculous, then obviously the signal would go by rising prices and a shrinking dividend, and people would say, gee, we're not doing quite as well as we were last month. Maybe we should just boost this a little bit.
That's right.
So I mean, it's a balancing thing, and in social credit, balance is really an important term. We want to balance costs and prices with equivalent purchasing power.
That's right.
And,
it's a distribution. It's
yes.
a method of distribution. Yeah, production, consumption, but the distribution is the issue.
And when the producer, today the producer is capable of producing, I mean, at one time, the producer more or less provided for himself and his family, right? Today, you can push a button and a process of production jumps into action, which can produce just zillions of times as much as the producers themselves could ever consume. So what are you going to do? You're going to have a glut? Are you not going to distribute that? It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. But in actual fact, under the existing financial narrative, if there is a glut, they'll throw it in the ocean rather than give it away. They'll throw it in the ocean. They'll bury it. They'll destroy it rather than give it away to people who need it.
Yeah,
And it is. It's immoral. It's immoral when people are in need and they haven't worked. What is this some sort of self-righteousness perspective on people who would work if they could? And it should be distributed to them. And that's what we're talking about, an equitable distribution system that balances production and consumption. And so the financial system should reflect that by redeeming debt and by having sufficient purchasing power, similar to a vote. It's a financial vote instead of a political vote. That doesn't cost anything, a political vote. It's your inherent right. And so should a financial vote be your inherent right, that you've got sufficient financial votes to buy what is necessary as your share of the cultural inheritance of production technology. Yeah, Robert Klinck.
Well, we saw the way gluts and surpluses were dealt with during the Great Revolution of the 1930s, and it wouldn't be any different today.
No.
And it's all based on the assumption, I guess, that if people are given anything freely, then it's going to corrupt them.
Mhm.
But when you think of it was this virtually a crucifixion of society in that period of the 1930s on a world scale.
Yeah.
A terrible crime, and they were pouring gluts of milk down the sewers, and they were, slaughtering cattle and dumping cubic miles of fruit so it would rot somewhere, and letting people work for 25 cents an hour or something, digging holes and filling them up again. This is how insane this society is, and it's based on this concept that people, I guess, are inherently evil and they better be kept with their nose to the grindstone. But in fact, social credit would create a cohesion in society, because as Wally was saying, there's a feedback. If you are non-productive, then your dividend is going to go down. And who wants that? The thing is, it's a very simple concept, I think. If it was once got over to people, they would understand that it's to their advantage to contribute and to, produce things. And if they did it, they would be able to market what they're producing because there would be sufficient demand for it. What mystifies me is why business people don't become active promoters of concepts of national dividend and so on. Because in Canada, at least, 80 to 90% of businesses fail because of bankruptcy. In the long run. It's not, the occasional business. Practically all businesses fail that way. And so businesses are up against a wall. And the wall is trying to find a demand for their production.
That's right.
And so social credit would solve their problem. So it's really a mystery to me. I guess maybe it hasn't been presented to them properly, or I don't know, or maybe they are so much under the thumb of the financial powers because they're always applying for lines of credit with the banks and so on. So
that's right.
Maybe they don't want to rock the boat.
That's right. Yeah, because if the financial credit is turned off for their company, of course it's like 1929. Of course, it forces them into the corner. It is exactly right. Yeah. Closing comments, Wallace Klinck, please.
Well, I can't see why any businessman would not just automatically be attracted to social credit, because the purpose of business is to produce goods and services, ostensibly to do it efficiently. But if you have to engage in an increasing extension of activities which have no relationship whatever to the actual current function, before you can distribute the results of that current function, it just implies enormous inefficiency, and not only enormous, but increasingly enormous inefficiency, which of course ultimately is expressed in war, because your excesses our dividends are taken in the form of weapons and dumped on our enemies, who should be our friends, in order to dispose of the surplus, which is it's been called the desolation that maketh desolate, I guess in theological terms.
The abomination that maketh desolate.
What did I say?
You said the desolation that maketh desolate.
Oh, I'm sorry. The abomination that maketh desolate. That's right.
Yeah. It really is a sad state that you look at the end of production. It's
so it makes you feel, Arnie, that we're somehow caught in some kind of I really think that there is some kind of an ideological virus that has been placed into the consciousness of mankind, and that it is interfering with our normal, what should be our normal and beneficial development.
I agree with you, Wally. Part of the tour, the discussions that I've been having in the tour, was the inordinate influence of the media, but in particular, TV. And TV, of course, is an extension, because it's audio-visual, and it's flashing lights, flickering lights, all that. It actually draws you to it. It's hypnotic. And then all of this programming comes from it. the things that I've seen in the last few days. Not that I've had access to much TV, but to me, it's abhorrent. It's vile. It's putrid. It's filth, and yet that's what's presented on TV constantly. And it's just, hang on a sec. No, this is no way for children to see. Certainly no way. And if it's an expression of some foreign ideology to deconstruct just the mutual love and cooperation. I didn't see multiple generational families. I saw single generation and just friends. It was one generation and friends, no extended families at all. It was just so different from what is the real world. But
Would
you've
you
got
say,
to actually,
Arnie, would you say that they're trying to force us, for whatever reason, into a carnal mode of living rather than a spiritual?
oh, absolutely, certainly
Yeah,
carnal, and that is not only, it's an expression of, if you like, the will to power, which is a denial of God. The will to power being
absolutely. Yeah.
being a self-worship. Was it the Book of Genesis? The serpent to Adam and Eve, "You shall be as gods," and
Mhm.
that's essentially what they were accepting. That we shall live as gods. There is no higher form, and of course, as Whittaker Chambers said in that beautiful introduction to the book Witness, his letter to his children, he said the beauty of the ear of his child was enough to change his point of view completely. There had to be design. And this war, this cultural war, is a belief in man as God or as God as God. It's one or the other. That's what communism, capitalism is all about. Closing comments, Robert Klinck, please.
Yeah, well, with regard to television, I believe that the people who are running things are or engage expert psychologists, and they've got us coming and going with every kind of influence you could possibly imagine. And television not only is full of utter garbage, I mean, it's worse and worse all the time, you know, comedies that aren't funny and absolute gore and this sort of thing. But it all, when you're watching television, you become totally passive. Your
Yeah,
mind turns off. And
yeah,
since this was pointed out to me, I've observed it in myself. I
yeah,
watch hardly any television, but
yeah,
I become a passive creature.
yeah.
So it is a terrible thing that's been introduced into society.
Mm,
But as a closing comment, I would just say that there is a deficiency of buying power in our economy, and it's just a matter of how we're going to fill it. It's increasing all the time because of technological progress, and we can fill it in the way the bankers allow us to, which is to get us on this treadmill and make us run ever faster in order to try to keep up with the accumulating costs by more production.
mm.
Or we can take the social credit path, which is to enhance personal freedom and get us off the treadmill.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Just to clarify for our viewers, we're talking about Douglas social credit, the national dividend, consumer price subsidy, not the Chinese system which they label social credit, which in actual fact is social monitoring and social discredit. It's exactly the opposite. So, and to me, that's the reflection of the two philosophies before us, the two profound thoughts. Is God God and therefore creator of all, or is man God and the highest form of living being and therefore nothing outside the imagination or thinking within man, within reasoning man? And that's what Whittaker Chambers wrote about. And in my view, what an impertinence to think that an individual's thinking is the ultimate that anyone can think or imagine or pursue. It's preposterous to say one individual when, of course, everything that you learn, everything that you do, everything that you see, given an opportunity, you will take it further. And so the individual before you is limited only in their thinking and their understanding of what they know. And of course, if they try and relate that to the real world and engage it, place it in context, communism was a hideous experiment and it failed to the tune of hundreds of millions of people. Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you so much for today, for today's forum. Justification for the National Dividend. Wally Klinck, thank you.
Thank you, Arnie.
No worries. And Robert Klinck, thank you.
Thanks again, Arnie, for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure speaking with you.
Good on you, boys. All right. Cheers, ladies and gentlemen. We'll catch you next time. And Arnis Luks at the Freedom